Hello, and welcome to today's ICTUS International Music Competition interview. I'm your host, Alex. Today we have a very special guest, David Bilger. David is principal trumpet of the Philadelphia Orchestra and on the faculty at the Curtis Institute of Music and Temple University. He will serve as a finals judge in our inaugural 2018 trumpet competition. Dave, it's an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I wanted to start today's interview if you could just tell us maybe about your very first notes in music, how you started.
Well, I started on the piano in second grade, and I was lucky that my parents bought an instrument. In fact, I still have it. It's a cheap, terrible spinet piano, but it's sentimental. But they really placed a value on music education, and so I started taking piano lessons, and then I started on the trumpet, actually on a cornet in fourth grade public school music band program.
Okay. And what point did you become serious with trumpet or start taking lessons?
Well, I mean, according to my mother used to say that from the first note I played, it never sounded bad, and I think that's a mother talking. It's not exactly probably reality, but it came fairly easily to me. Partially, I think, because my first band director in grade school was a trumpet player, so my first experience on the instrument was guided well by someone who sort of knew what they were doing. If he was maybe a sax player or a percussionist, I might not have had the same embouchure setup as I did. So he started me off really well. And then when I was in seventh grade, I started taking some private lessons with a man named Robert Dominiak, who was in Milwaukee. He was a junior high band director, and he was also a sort of a show player. In the summers, he played some summer stock stuff and played commercial stuff mostly, but it was again, really solid education. We just spent every lesson just knee-deep in the Arbin book, and that was it. It was Arbin, more Arbin, and eventually that stuck. And then when I got into high school, I started taking lessons with Dennis Najum, who was in the Milwaukee Symphony, and he sort of opened my eyes to orchestral playing and to some other styles of music.
And what point in high school did you say, okay, I'm going to major in music, or this is going to be my life?
I waited till the last possible second. It was sort of application time senior year in high school, where I was like, well, am I going to do math and computers, or am I going to do trumpet? And probably if I'd done math and computers, I'd be like a billionaire right now, because it was right when all the computer stuff was really breaking, and I had some friends who were, sort of early employees at places like Microsoft, and got in early and got all the stock options and are well retired at a young age. But I decided that I had to shoot for a music career, because if it didn't work out, then I could always go back and do something else. But I knew I'd always regret it if I didn't do my best, put my best effort into being a musician.
Wonderful.
It turned out okay.
Yeah, I think we're happy that you're in the trumpet world. We have you to listen to. So then you auditioned for colleges. Did you audition at multiple colleges, or did you just go for one? Or
well, I did. It wasn't quite the process for college as it is today. So I applied at University of Michigan, and also at University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, because I grew up in suburban Milwaukee. So it was actually just two schools, and I was really hoping to go to Michigan, and that's when Armando Gatalla was teaching there.
Oh.
And I got in, and then we got our FAFSA, and even though we didn't have money, somehow we didn't get much scholarship money from the school, and coming from sort of a lower middle class upbringing, we just couldn't afford to go to University of Michigan. So it was going to be University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which is not quite as strong a music school as the school in Madison. It's really sort of a second destination in Milwaukee, and I'm sure they have good students there. But my teacher at that time, Dennis Najum, said, "You're not going there. We got to find another alternative." And he got on the phone and reached out to David Hickman, who was teaching at the University of Illinois at the time, and said, "I got this kid. You got to hear him." And so it was actually, I remember the date, it was June 10th, after graduation, when I went down to the University of Illinois and auditioned and put in a late application and was accepted, and Dave Hickman somehow rattled the trees and came up with some good scholarship money for me. And then I did my 4 years at Illinois.
Well, that's amazing. That's amazing.
it's nice to have mentors and people that really that care enough and that can go the extra mile, which both of them did for me.
That's really wonderful. What point then during your college career did you start taking auditions, or were you just going, okay, I'm going to go get a master's degree, or?
Oh, I never thought about a master's degree.
Okay.
I mean, I was like, I wanted to play the trumpet, and school was school. It was great, but I think I took my first audition was sophomore year. It was might have been freshman. No, it was sophomore year for a Phoenix Symphony, and made the finals. It was the first audition. It was pretty cool. And they're so lucky they didn't hire me because I was nowhere near ready to actually do the job. But I think they probably figured that out. And so actually it was one of those auditions that was a no hire. And then I kept taking some auditions and did pretty well. There was an audition in San Diego, where again they didn't hire, but the two finalists were me and Mike Sachs.
Oh, wow.
And that was actually one of the first times we met, and actually ended up having a great friendship. And we played in a brass quintet together at Juilliard when we were both doing our masters. So it was sort of a funny coincidence that it was the two of us in that final. But when it became clear that I wasn't going to get an orchestra job, I started looking for other gigs. And senior year of college, joined a group called the Eastern Brass Quintet, which was represented by Columbia Artist Management. We were on the road. So my senior year in college, I was actually on the road playing quintets and finishing up some credits and begging my way to miss certain things, weeks of ensembles. And school was really generous and let me do that. And so I did that for a while, and then started looking for a master's degree, and that's when I ended up at Juilliard studying with Mark Gould, which was life-changing. Anybody who's met Mark knows what I'm talking about.
Yes. And were there any memorable experiences during your years at Juilliard in New York? Or
well, I did. I always sort of joke that I bought a master's degree because I was only there a year. It was the last year they allowed 1 year for a master's, because I had tested out of a lot of the core academics and some of the music classes, because I had been one of those music geeks in undergrad and gotten A's in all my classes and studied really hard and done all that kind of stuff. Being, the good Lutheran boy from the Midwest, I was like, okay, these are the rules. I'm going to play by the rules and do what I'm asked. And it paid a benefit when it got to grad school, so I managed to be in and out of Juilliard in a year. The most memorable things were lessons. And I remember my first lesson with Mark, where I played a bunch of stuff, and he says, well, you sound pretty good for some, boy from the Midwest, but you're in New York City now, and you need to learn how to play like a Jew. And I had no idea what he was talking about, but I'm like, okay, how do we do that? And of course, what he was talking about was that commitment to looking beyond the page. Mm-hmm. And really bringing personality into the music, and not just being someone who recreates the black dots on the white page, but somebody who looks beyond that and tries to bring out that the depth of the musical content, getting inside the head of the composer, putting it in the forefront of the playing, the music making, whereas till that point, I think in the forefront had been more of a technical approach to the instrument. And what I really needed was to have both. And he filled in the gaps for me. So that was probably the most memorable thing about my year at Juilliard.
Wonderful. And when you graduated Juilliard, I know you played in the Dallas Symphony as principal for a while. What was your path to Dallas? Was that like right after, or did you?
No, actually, while I was in New York, I started freelancing. And it was during an era where the freelance work was high quality and voluminous, and there weren't that many players. I mean, there were some really good players, but it was a little easier to break in because there was more work and there were fewer people competing for it. And so I started doing some of the better work, I think, in New York, subbing at the Met, subbing at the Philharmonic, playing in chamber groups, doing ballet stuff, Martha Graham, I was really busy doing that and enjoying it. I had a brass quintet that did a lot of gigs. I worked a lot playing weddings and Sunday mornings at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian. And so I had my regular circuit of gigs. And then I was contacted by the Oakland Symphony their principal trumpet had left mid-August, right before the season was starting in September. So they were looking for somebody to come and fill a 1 year. And I went out and played an audition and played 2 concerts with them, and they offered me the job. And then the orchestra promptly went on strike. And at the end of that year, the orchestra went Chapter 7 out of business. Okay. So I did get a season in there, or part of a season, once the strike was settled, which was my first sort of full-time experience. But at that point, I was sort of bi-coastal, playing certain weeks in Oakland and still freelancing in New York. And it was also that same year that I won the Concert Artist Guild International Competition and gave my debut at Carnegie, what was then called Carnegie Recital Hall and is now Weill Hall.
Mm-hmm. I think Brandon, who was one of our other judges,
yeah,
won
Brandon
the same
was
competition.
He was the next trumpet player that won that. It was 29 years later.
Wow!
So we're the only 2. So that's a nice coincidence with the competition here.
Wonderful. And then, when did you audition for Dallas? Then were you were going back and forth? And
well, right at that point, and then Oakland folded, and so then I was back full-time freelancing in New York, and the job opened up in, I saw in the Union paper that Dallas was open. And my wife at the time said, well, you need to go and win this because I want to have a family. And New York wasn't so conducive to that, living in a tiny apartment. And it was like, well, okay. And ended up taking the audition. And again, there were 2 finalists for the job. It was me and Mike Sachs. Oh, wow. And they had us both come back after the finals to do a trial day. It was a rehearsal day where there were 2 rehearsals, and we split halves of each rehearsal. So it was really nerve-wracking because I knew Mike really well. We're friends. I knew the quality of his playing because he's just an amazing trumpet player. And it was sort of luck of the draw that I ended up with it, and ended up staying there for 7 years. It was a great experience. I made some great friends there and had some really wonderful musical experience. Eduardo Mata was the music director, and he unfortunately left the earth a little too soon in a private plane crash. But he was a really fine conductor and a very thoughtful musician, and I learned a lot working with him.
And from your experience there, when did you decide to come audition for Philadelphia?
Well, things were going great in Dallas. After Maestro Mata left, Andrew Litton was the music director, and it was fun times with Andy because he's got a very natural way of music making. He's exuberant on the podium. Even though he's sort of a big guy, he dances a lot up there and sort of whips things into a frenzy when it's called for. And I was very happy and content there. But then I saw the opening in Philly, and growing up, there were 2 orchestras that I listened to all the time, and one was, of course, Chicago with Herseth, and the other was Philly when Gil Johnson was principal. I grew up on those recordings, and I felt like it was a good fit for the way I hear music, and I felt like at that age, it was really a good time for me to give a shot at the biggest time. I mean, Dallas was a good job, but Philly has a much longer and grander tradition and sort of a different point of view on music making, and so I figured I'd give it a shot. Why not? I had auditioned in Pittsburgh a couple of years before and been in the finals with Tim Morrison and George Vosberg, and George ended up with the job. So I had looked, a little bit from my time in Dallas, but I was very specific about where I might want to end up, which was in cities in which I'd like to live, which have a cool feel to them, and in places that, that where the music resonated with me.
What was the audition process like for you?
It was like hell. It was pure hell. It's. I joke with my current students that auditioning is a young person's craft, because when you're in school, you have that time to focus really on working on excerpts, and when you're sitting in the job, you may have a greater sense of experience, and in fact, your chops may even be in a better place. But it's a little more difficult and more challenging to set aside that time to practice excerpts 2 or 3 hours a day when you have a rehearsal and a concert. So I ended up practicing post-concert a lot of times. I'd go from like 10:30 to 1:30 in the morning, working up the list and just trying desperately to put in the kind of preparation time that's necessary to win a big job. And so I came and played. The list was super long. The solos were first movement of Tomasi and Honegger and Trotta. And it was pretty early into the Honegger being popular for auditions. Now everybody plays it. Now you have to play it to get into grad school a lot of places. And people learn it. But at that point, I'd never played it before. I'd only even heard it once. So I had to learn Honegger in like 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I called a pianist friend and said, can we read it, so I would know how it fit together, and of course listened to recordings and did all that kind of prep stuff. And then the excerpt list was long, and there was it was all everybody's favorites plus some more unusual excerpts. So it was really substantial. And then I was fortunate enough not to have to play a prelim because of my job in Dallas, so I came into the semifinal round. Played that behind a screen, then played a final round behind a screen, and then did a round with the section where the screen came down, because obviously the section would then know who's playing since they're sitting next to you. So the screen came down at that point, and there were a few of us left. And actually Tim Morrison was the other guy, and I'm like, well, it wouldn't feel that bad to lose to Tim, because he was one of my favorite trumpet players. Yeah. And fortunately, it went the other way, but it was some good competition, that's for sure.
And did you find out like on the spot, or did you get a phone call, or how was your?
So we started the solo round at 9 in the morning because they had a matinee concert at 2, so we had to do the finals between like 9 and 1 o'clock. So they had to hurry through it. So it felt pretty darn early to be honking through the Honegger at 9 in the morning. But with piano, so you had to rehearse with the pianist and then go and honk. And then there was a round of excerpts after that, and then the round with the section. And then the committee deliberated, and they told me at that point.
I'm just curious, what was your reaction like when you?
Well, my reaction, well, it was disbelief in a certain way, because you grow up and there's a certain reverence for those big jobs and for the players who've held those jobs. And to think that I might be stepping into those shoes was it's a great responsibility, actually, and an unknown and a great deal of fun. So I was in awe of it and amazed and in a certain way surprised, because I think anytime you go into an audition and there's 100 people or 200 or 300 you're going up against, it's to come out as the one has got to be a surprise, no matter how well prepared you are.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So you were talking a little bit earlier about, you said you would prepare in the evenings from like 10:30 to 1:30 a.m., which is a lot of dedication. Well,
I mean, pianists and string players practice a lot more than that. So,
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, it's not, it's nothing that was Herculean.
But looking back, I guess it's about over 20 years ago now. Do you remember what was going through your head when you during the audition? Like what was your thought process like?
Well, I had the benefit of a really great training, and one of the things that David Hickman was really strong about was how to keep focus and not let non-musical things sort of become an impediment or get in your head or distract you. So I was really thinking about what I was supposed to be thinking about, which is how to create character in each of the excerpts, be compelling in what I did, and be accurate. And I think it was actually the combination of those things. One of my soapbox topics are the people that complain about orchestra auditions as just being all about note getting, and that's only true to a certain point. You can miss things and still win. You can't miss a lot. But when it comes down to the people who are actually going to win the job, it really has to do with portraying the music and bringing the music to life with solid technique and not missing a lot of notes. It isn't just getting notes, especially when you get into the top orchestras. They want to hear a style that's going to match with what the tradition of the orchestra is. And I think that's one of the reasons that that I ended up on the winning side of that audition was my experience listening to so many recordings of the Philadelphia Orchestra when I was young. I heard the sound of that string section. I heard the incredible wind soloists. I knew the commitment to phrasing and the way that the orchestra liked to make music. And I wouldn't say that I necessarily changed what I did in preparation, but it encouraged me to use my voice because I think the way that I hear music does line up really well with Philly. I thought it was a good fit for me if I could do what was in my head. So my goal was, in the audition, was be solid, don't freak out, use your air well, hear the sound that you want to make, put it in the room, don't overthink, and sing your song. And I was able to do that at least most of the time.
Wonderful. So many good takeaway points there.
Well, auditioning is hard, and it's definitely a skill, and it's a much different skill than playing concerts. And we learn first how to practice, hopefully, and then the second thing we learn how to do is how to play in lessons, which is closer to a performance than just practicing, but it's not the whole way to performance. And then we get experience performing. But how many auditions do we play in our lives? Which is why doing mocks is so important. Auditioning for summer festivals is so important. Doing any audition you can, because it gives you that experience in learning how to show what you've got, how to do what you do in that setting, which is admittedly very unnatural.
Mm-hmm. And I sort of wanted to use that as a segue maybe into the next question, which is, now that you're on the other side of the screen, when people audition for the orchestra, what is it that you're listening for that makes you say, okay, this is the person as you're narrowing it down?
Well, it does vary by round. Okay. I mean, the first round, a lot of it is people I find, and this sounds harsh, but they self-select their way out of auditions by rhythm issues, pitch issues. Those are number 1 and 2. Number 3 is style issues. Seldom it's accuracy. I mean, some people have an unfortunate day where their chops just aren't working, or the travel didn't suit them, or the moment gets to them a little too much and the nerves get in the way of them being able to do what they do. And that's always a disappointment for me, listening to auditions when somebody's having a tough time on the stage. My wish in an audition is to have a hard time deciding, to have so many people play well and play at their level that it becomes a difficult decision. And some people, unfortunately, can't, in that moment, show what they can do, and others haven't been aware enough, perhaps, of what they do to notice their pitch inconsistencies or their time inconsistencies. So it does have to do somewhat with, as I say, people self-selecting them out. At that point, it becomes easy. The people who sound confident, play musically, and play with a degree of commitment and accuracy make it onto the semifinal round. The semis get more difficult because then, you have a pool of players who are able to, in that setting, play really well, and then it becomes more towards selecting colleague you want to work with. Style of articulation, quality of sound, color of sound. Is what they do variable enough? In other words, is there just one loud sound, or do they change it depending on the musical setting? It can be bright, it can be dark, can it be a warm lyrical forte sound? Can it be, shred and metal sound? Because that's called for too. Can they bring that much diversity of playing into the excerpts? And those are the people that tend to separate themselves into the final round. Okay. And my experience in the finals is it's usually a difficult decision because you have some really, really fine players, and at that point it's really a matter of picking the best fit. Mm-hmm. I was able to interview Yannick Nézet-Séguin, our music director in Philly, for the International Trumpet Guild. I do a column there called Inside the Orchestra. And for the 2 or 3 people an issue that bother to read it, or are interested enough to read it, or are ITG members, which everyone should be. That's my shameless plug. He talked about what he listens for in auditions. And he made the argument that it isn't about note getting. It's about making a compelling argument. It's about having a point of view and showing that point of view from his side of the stage. Even if he doesn't like the style that someone brings to an excerpt, if they bring a committed style that shows a musical approach, he likes that far better than a bland approach, a cookie-cutter approach to the excerpts. And that, to me, is very, very telling.
Huh. That's wonderful advice. I also wanted to ask, so you listen to auditions in the orchestra, and you listen to students audition at Curtis. Mm-hmm. How does that differ? When students are younger, what is it that you're listening for when somebody auditions at Curtis?
It's a completely different process, actually. It's taken me a while to get where I am in terms of selecting talent. It's come through personal experience and also from talking with other educators. I had a great conversation with Barbara Butler about how she selects people at Rice. And basically, it's trying to ascertain the balance between where they are today, in other words, what they've been able to achieve, versus what the potential is. And then the third thing in the mix is you want people that you want to work with. I've taken to interviewing people via phone calls after, we break it down into a couple of finalists, and get to know the people outside of the audition so you understand what personalities are there and who might bring something unique into the studio, who's going to be a good colleague. Because having a culture inside a trumpet studio where people are supportive of one another and helpful to one another sort of increases the potential for learning exponentially. And so it's not necessarily, or not even always, the person who plays the best for the entrance audition. At Curtis, it's complicated also by the fact that often we have one opening, and we have an artist diploma program, which is for people who have their bachelor's degrees already, and we have people applying for transfer and people applying as undergrads. And clearly they have to be held to a different standard, because someone who's 22 and been through a 4-year course of study at Juilliard or Northwestern or Rice is going to be at a very different level of playing than someone who's just coming out of high school. So trying to predict what the upside potential is the challenge of listening to these auditions. Once again, there's a percentage who self-select because perhaps their setups, the embouchure isn't functional so well, or they have production issues. Things that are time-consuming to fix, not impossible to fix, but time-consuming. And here at Curtis, with only 5 students, people have to hit the ground running day one and play in the ensembles. And Curtis Symphony is sort of a world-class ensemble, and so we can't really invest the time in someone to fix basic things in their playing. They have to come in sort of ready to go, and lucky with the applicant pool that we have that we're always able to be able to do that. At Temple University, I've had the opportunity, because it's a bigger studio, between all the students who are in there, not just mine, but I've had the opportunity to take some students who are maybe not only younger in age, but haven't been able to really have a great deal of experience on the instrument, but that show the kind of promise that I think that they're going to be able to succeed. So that's yet another standard, which again has to do with predicting potential and not necessarily, what are you doing for me today? Where are you today? Whereas for the orchestra, it's based solely on the notes you hear that moment. So it really is a much different process.
Okay. I wanted to go back a little bit too to your orchestra experience and ask. You mentioned a column you did with Yannick. What are some of the lessons you've learned from the great conductors that you've worked with?
Well, the first lesson is a lesson that I believe completely in, and I use this not only for my own performance but in my teaching, which is there are far more than one way of playing a piece. Mm-hmm. That music works in many different ways depending on your point of view, and one might resonate with you more. You know, I believe this way is better, but it doesn't make a different way of approaching a piece wrong. And in fact, I've done concerts with conductors. Simon Rattle comes to mind, where his approach to a piece was very different than what my tradition was with that piece and the way that I heard it. And it was actually stunningly different. But his infectious nature on the podium and the gravitas he brings to what he does made everyone buy into it. And it ended up being a stunning performance that was completely surprising to me, what he was able to bring out of the piece and how different it was than what I traditionally heard in that piece. So I think one of the biggest lessons working with great conducting is the fact that you need to be open to others' ideas. And that encourages me in my own preparation to question what I do. Am I doing something because it's what I've always done? Am I doing something it's because I was taught that way, or because a conductor whose approach I love did it that way? Or am I doing it because I've really thought about it? And it makes it possible to keep pieces like, for instance, Beethoven 7, which I've performed with Philly about 90 times, literally, wow. Or Pictures, which I've done 75 or 80 times. I used to keep track of them, and keep that fresh, because I'm always re-questioning what I do with phrasing, with the notes, and different conductors bring in a different approach, which can be enlightening or infuriating, depending on the conductor. But always different and always interesting.
Okay. And I had another question too: is how do you balance your day-to-day? You're teaching at Curtis and Temple and playing in the orchestra, doing a lot of master classes and things. And how do you balance your life work schedule and warming up? Do you have a daily routine or habits that you do?
Wow, that's about 10 questions
Sorry,
in one. So no, that's good. Daily routine, yes, and it changes from month to month, year to year. It's based on a template, so I hit the same kinds of things, but I will end up doing them in different orders and in different amounts, depending on what I feel the needs are for my chops at that point in a season or for the repertoire that's coming up. Preparation is a challenge because of the work schedule. We do 31 subscription weeks, and that's compressed within about 33 weeks of the year. So there's 2 hours of music on your stand every week, and you have to learn from that and say, okay, I need to prep early and keep ahead of it, because if not, you can't really cram the night before for a rehearsal, because it just requires too much sort of metabolizing of the stuff. You don't want to be reading or questioning your transposition at a first rehearsal, because that's really a great way to get in trouble. Colleagues aren't going to be too kind to you if you're stepping on stuff. You don't want to be that guy. So staying ahead of it is important. It's really a challenge, especially when there's other things coming up. Coming up in a few months, I'm playing a concerto with Philly, and I've been working on that piece for about 6 months. It's a new piece to me. It may even be a U.S. premiere. I don't know. It's a piece by Christian Lindberg. Oh, cool. Really cool work. Akbank Bunka is the name of it. It's got Turkish jazz elements to it. It's really cool. But it's really facey, and there's a zillion notes. And so I've been working on it for quite some time. Again, just so I don't feel so pressured in the last month or two leading up to it. I want to get it, really in the DNA early. Travel is always an issue, trying to fit in classes, trying to fit in, mentoring, and then teaching. Teaching is probably the easiest component because it's just sort of built into my schedule. I have a regular day where I'm here, and a regular day that I'm working with my Temple students, and that sort of gets built into the schedule. But it's a challenge. Work-life balance. Sometimes I do better at that than others, and it's a constant struggle because I think it took me till about 4 years ago to say the two-letter word that starts with N and ends in O. And it's hard to say no because, you know, somebody wants a lesson and they want to come in from out of town and you want to share. I mean, if I hadn't had the great teachers that I had and the great mentors that I've had, teachers being, I've mentioned Robert Dominiak, my first real serious teacher, and Dennis Najum and David Hickman, Mark Gould, but also the mentors I had, which include Ed Carroll and Alan Dean and Ray Mace, guys that I worked with who I learned so much from as well. Without that experience, I wouldn't be the player that I am today. Those people molded me, so I want to be available to people, but there are only a certain number of hours in the day. And it pains me when I have to turn down like a solo engagement because it would give me a chance to play a piece I want to play, or go to a place I haven't been, or do judging of a competition, or doing a master class. I try to fit some stuff in, but it gets challenging. So I have some places that I try to carve out time for, like New World Symphony. I tend to go down there and coach once a year. We try to book it early. They know scheduling can be a problem. And so I have some places that I normally go. Hamamatsu for the Hamamatsu Academy and Festival that's run by Yamaha, and the city of Hamamatsu. So I carve out some places, and then the rest of it try to fit in, and then unfortunately have to say no sometimes because family's important. You have to make time. And someplace in there, time for yourself and time to practice, because it never gets easier. Practice is constant and eternal, and it's just what it is. It's the gig.
Do you have any specific routines you do, like buzzing or?
Yeah, I start with a mouthpiece every morning. I know that that's a controversial topic. That some brass pedagogues are really against buzzing. I show it to my students as an option. They can try it, and most of them actually do it. But if it doesn't work for them, I don't insist on it. It works for me, as long as I understand that the buzzing isn't intended to make the sound as clear as the trumpet. You want to get a little air in the sound, and that the pitches that you're buzzing aren't exactly the same pitches that you're going to make on the instrument. You're actually buzzing in a bit of a lower register. If you put buzz that into the mouthpiece, into the horn, the horn makes it resonate differently. So as long as you keep your place on the mouthpiece, I think it's hugely valuable to me. It just gives me the right production. Flow studies, single tonguing, double tonguing, triple tonguing, scales, arpeggios, finger busters, either Nagel speed studies, or Tony Ploeg has these pattern books, which are just, some of them are non-tonal and they tear up your brain. But stuff that keeps you going. Practicing not just the easy scales, but doing the more challenging scales, living in D flat and B major, and then doing some of the stuff from the Vizzuti books, which take you into some modal playing and whole tone scales and diminished scales, stuff that isn't just, hey, I'm going to play an F because it's easy. Because we all get a little lazy, right? It's like, hey, okay, I'm going to turn off my brain and warm up now. I try not to waste the time. So, but it's all patterned after the Ray Mace 10-week practice guide, which is not a note of it that he wrote, but it's a compilation from Schlossberg and Goldman Practical Studies and Clark Studies and Arbin and all the books that everybody's used, colon lip flexibilities. Shoebrook, which is a book most people don't know, but that's in Ray's guide. And then I use that as my template, and then I've created my own sort of workarounds from that. And then usually once a year I get back to that book and do 10 weeks of that. So, just breaking it up a little bit. I know Mike Sachs likes to play the exact same notes in the exact same order every day, which works great for him, and it works great for some students, so I point that out as a possibility too. I like to switch it up, maybe because my attention span is shorter. I don't know. But, I think having the regularity of at least hitting those major aspects of technique every day helps to keep the playing in decent shape.
Okay. And we were talking earlier about a good sound and pitch and rhythm, things like that. And I know sometimes when you listen to what is a good sound, it's a bit subjective, but what are maybe some objective qualities that you would use to describe finding a good sound or a good buzz on the mouthpiece?
Well, there are lots of good sounds, and it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your sound. And I think, although my basic sound concept is similar to what it's been, it has changed over the years. It changes based on, in an orchestra, what are your colleagues doing? What does the concert hall do for you? I try to bring a little bit more brilliance and directness into my playing in Verizon Hall than I did when we were at the Academy of Music. And also, I know that Yannick Nézet-Séguin likes a sound that is more viscerally exciting. So I'm putting a little more pedal to the metal sometimes, a little more brilliance in the sound, a little more edge, some bite, changing the articulation a little bit. But to me, that's like a painter taking a palette and adding more colors to it. It's not as if you're replacing colors. You just maybe need to get a bigger palette, so you have more colors in there. For me, a good sound has to do with having production here that's natural, so that the chops are buzzing efficiently. You're not having to work too hard. That it buzzes loud, buzzes soft, buzzes across the register, doesn't change too much. I think if you're doing that, then you're able to get out the bell the sound that you hear in your head, which should be individual. It should be different. It's like I can hear the best sound in the world. I can listen to Phil Smith recordings, or I can listen to Herseth recordings, but that's not the sound that's me. It's their sound. And I'm a huge believer that we don't want to make clones of ourselves or of anybody else, that in bringing out our individual concepts and our individuality, we add to the art form. It's sort of like Star Trek Next Generation, the Borg. We want to assimilate everybody and make this, take everyone's uniqueness and make it part of a whole. And that's really what an orchestra is a big collective. And having more of those voices, individual voices, is important, especially in principal roles. In the section, you might have to subordinate that a little bit to try to match, which is something that my second, Tony Prisk, does so well. He tries to get inside my sound, and if I'm going to edge something up, he goes right with me. If I'm going to color something down, he does that. So his ears have to be on, and he's got to have the biggest color palette.
And I had another question, a trumpet geek question now.
Okay, go for it.
Which is more just maybe equipment related. Do you feel it's important that you find the right setup for you or
it helps. I mean, a good horn helps, and a good mouthpiece helps.
Okay.
And, there's no perfect. There's, because of the physics of the instrument and the fact that we're all different, our physicality is different, our muscles are different, our teeth are different, oral cavity is different, the way we shape our tongue when we play is different, the way we use our air is different. We have different ability to move air based on our physicality, our size. We're all different.
Yeah.
So there's no one right setup, but a setup that's good for you makes a big difference. Something that brings evenness across the registers, something that has clear articulation, a horn that delivers reliable pitch. Even if the pitch isn't great, as long as it's predictable and movable enough so that you can make the adjustments using the slides and knowing when you have to use chops. But having equipment that is reliable in that way is really helpful. I think it's telling these days that when I was doing National Brass Ensemble, we had some of the best orchestral trumpet players in the country, most of them actually, a good deal of them there in the room. And there were two brands of trumpets that were being played. Okay. People can guess what those brands are. I'm not going to do product placement, even though you can look on the web and see me say a certain sentence that we were talking about earlier. I'm not going for the product placement here, but I think it is telling that there are sounds that are more accepted and that tend to work more with string sections in the orchestra. Okay. And that'd be different for jazz players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And going back to our competition, it's going to be slightly different because everything is recorded, which makes, there's no travel, so it's easier to submit, but it's also slightly different to watch those pieces. So what is it that when you're looking at a tape that you think would make you say, okay, this is, what will you be listening for?
Well, I mean, I think it's a pretty easy question, actually. When you listen to a great player live or on YouTube or on recording, what gets you jazzed about their playing? Technical mastery and just a ton of personality. can you bring the music to life? You know, that's why I love some of the trumpet players that I love to listen to, just because what they bring is just, there's a uniqueness to what they do. It's moving, it's visceral. It makes, you know, they'll turn a phrase a certain way, and you'll go, ooh, that was cool. Or they'll play something with you know, an intensity or a power that just makes the hair stand up on your arms. You go like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. And moving into a more deep and open-ended question, where do you see the future of classical music and orchestras in the 21st century?
Well, that's like the most difficult question anybody can ever ask. I mean, I know clearly the orchestra business has been in some state of challenge for 50 years. Most people don't realize that the first full-time 52-week orchestra in the U.S. was the Philadelphia Orchestra. In 1961 was the first time there was a 52-week contract. Wow. Most people assume that these jobs were full-time, going a long way back, and that actually isn't true. When you look at some of the orchestra players back in the olden days, they would have summer jobs. One of them had a painting contracting company. I mean, people would do stuff, and they would all, you know, supplement doing something. And then we became used to the concept of 52-week work. And it does make life a little easier, getting things like paid vacation and medical, you know, those kind of benefits. There's the stuff that corporate America folks took for granted that came to musicians later. But the demands of contracts for 52-week orchestras put a lot of economic pressure on institutions that ended up relying upon fundraising. Back in the day, back in the Stokowski and Ormandy era, Philadelphia Orchestra got 25% of their operating budget selling LPs.
Wow.
25%.
Wow.
And now it's, you know, a fraction of 1% because people consume their art in different ways, and there's an expectation that you can stream something for free. I mean, who hasn't used Spotify, right?
Yeah.
And or you can YouTube it and hear some pretty cool stuff. And so the way we consume that art is different, and the way that people learn about the art form is different. There's less classical music education in the schools, less exposure, fewer people playing the instruments in that setting, which has the trickle down of making it more of a challenge to fill seats. And then there's the challenge of philanthropy, because it's hard to make the argument that, you know, we need to fund the orchestra when there's people starving, when there are people that don't have homes, when there are people whose homelands are in chaos and they are looking to go somewhere where they're not going to get killed. I mean, it's heavy topics. I can make the argument that art is important because I believe it, but the philanthropic community also has so many demands upon them that it's thinned out some of the available capital. And there's also the type of philanthropy that's become a challenge. I love David Brooks, and I know that some people will have just turned off this interview hearing me say that, because early in his career he was more towards the right politically, and then he became a centrist, and now he's become a more left of center, but people still think of him as an ideologue. And really he's not. He was always pretty happy to bash both sides politically. But he wrote a piece in an op-ed in the New York Times which was called "Why Our Elites Stink." And basically his argument was that back in the day, even when we had robber barons like Carnegie, people who were very tough businessmen and took advantage of their workers in a certain way that we don't appreciate anymore, the money that they earned, they did spend a good percentage of it on the public, through libraries, arts institutions, funding universities, giving back to the community. And there was a sense of those who had great wealth, that they felt the great responsibility of that great wealth to do something for their fellow people. And I think that has left the room for a lot of folks, where I think our collective distaste for the 1% would become less of a distaste if we understood that the 1% were sharing what they earned in a way that helped people. And all of these things make it more difficult for the arts community in general and for the orchestral community in specific. And the ways around that, I think, are clear, and the orchestras have responded to it rather slowly. Mark Gould always say the orchestra moves like a dinosaur, and hopefully not towards extinction. But moving any institution, making nimble curves in their trajectory is difficult. And part of it is to be out in the community, to show that we care, because we do, to interact with segments of the population that need us, that don't have the exposure to us, exposure in education, working in the communities, to be out there and to have access. Most people also don't know that there's $10 tickets available for, the rush tickets available for almost every concert that we do. And that students can sign up for Easy Seat, where for $25 they can come to any of the concerts during the year for free. Which is an amazing program. I mean, there's a limited number of tickets, so you got to jump early. But it's trying to make it, it's democratizing the art form, and that's actually what this competition is doing.
Yes,
is to democratize it, which is also one of the goals of both of the online projects that I've been involved in over the last 10 years, keeping the costs so incredibly low so that people anywhere can experience the art form and learn. Here, it's experience the art form and compete, no matter where they're from. And that's why the democratization of art through programs like this competition are so important.
Wonderful. We've talked a lot about teaching and sound and music. Do you have any other advice to students that are pursuing the same path as you today?
I think life has become more complicated for young people. Back in the boring days, it was sort of easier to navigate through teens into early 20s, and I think it's much more difficult now. Mm-hmm. I've actually read a bunch about why that might be, having shepherded a couple of my kids through that age. But there's so much distraction now, because you can practice with your cell phone out, you can have a computer with you, you have access to anything in the world at your fingertips. And it's hard to keep focus on what you need to be doing at one point. So first advice is the only electronics that should be out when you're practicing are tuner and metronome. And I've actually reinvested in old school ones, so they're not on apps, so my phone isn't out on my stand. I actually have like a dedicated tuner and a dedicated metronome sitting out there, because they're the equivalent of the rhythm and the pitch police. They really help. And the other thing is, with that idea of discipline, is trying to find that balance of how to work your schedule to have enough time to practice when you need to. Sort of blocking out your day so you have those 3 hours that it's just you and the instrument in a quiet room with your mind in the right place. I think those are the huge challenges. The repertoire hasn't significantly changed. Okay, we have some new pieces. They're fun to play, but and of course some of the pieces written for Håkan push the envelope of what's possible on the instrument. But basically most of what we do is really similar to what people were doing a generation ago. And so there's no reason why we can't succeed in the same way, with sort of that dedication to practice and the focus in how to get to the goal, setting those goals and figuring out how to get there. And it's like running a marathon. For a lot of people, I'm not talking about winning the marathon. I'm talking about finishing it. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's putting one foot in front of the other for a long time, and then eventually you've succeeded. And that's what happens with trumpet.
Okay. And I also wanted to ask about if you had any just general human life advice. I saw there was this story in the news that you helped this young student come over from, I think, Afghanistan,
Yeah.
And now he's studying here and going to college. He went to Interlochen. It was really amazing, but just...
It was a miracle, actually. I'm just lucky that the cosmos worked in such a way that the people wanted to respond to his need and help him.
Mm. It's a just amazing story.
He's an amazing kid. But yeah, I mean, you know, I guess through the challenges life throws at you, you change. And I've had some significant challenges, and not the person that I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, hopefully a better version. And I really wholeheartedly believe that we have to live for others, and we have to feel this sense of community that we're in. And community is like an onion, you know, with concentric circles. We have our community, which is us and our family, and then the next community is our friends, and the next community is our fellow students or coworkers, and the next community is people that live maybe in our town, and then it's the city close by, and then it's, you know, and finally you get to the whole world, the big onion. But living in a way that's where you help people, and you're actually responding to what's important, which is, you know, the world. Mm-hmm. It's now. I mean, you know, if you want to do something, you have to do it. Mm-hmm. And waiting to do it is really not an option, because we don't know how long we've got. Mm-hmm. And that realization came to me by losing some very important young people in my life, my son and one of my students. And you see these hugely talented, motivated, wonderful people who aren't here anymore. And I know this is really heavy for an interview, but it's the heart of what's my philosophy, which is, you know, you can't waste this time that we have. And nobody is going to remember a single concert that we did. Mm-hmm. But they're going to remember the people that we reached. And they might remember a body of work, or they might remember, oh, I used to go to the orchestra and I heard him play. That was cool. Mm-hmm. But it's more about what can you do to connect with people, whether it's on the stage, and making the experience of performing connect with the audience more. But also do it on a one-to-one level, whether it's through audience, through students, through things like this competition, where we get to meet people from different parts of the world all over the internet. You know, that's really what's important. And keeping an eye on that, it's so easy, I think especially as musicians, to become narcissistic. Our world becomes what we're doing that minute. Mm-hmm. And the world is much more than that. And my hope is that people come to that realization. And if more people do, maybe we can get that critical mass of people that live for each other, where we can actually figure out a way on this planet to live well with one another and avoid some sort of cataclysm and improve life for more people. And that starts one person at a time, which is why I worked with Bassett from Afghanistan. He asked for help. You know, why not?
Speaking about what you were talking about there, about that you have to do things now if you see the need to do something now, that you need to act on it. You were talking with me before we started filming, and you were talking about the importance of students broadening their horizons beyond just music and learning some entrepreneurial skills. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that as well.
Right. Well, you know, in this day and age, people don't do things for you anymore. You do things for yourself. And so the more skills that you have to be able to record yourself, to be able to put yourself up on the web, to start a YouTube channel, to connect with audiences, to learn how to fundraise, to start a nonprofit, to do grant proposals, to meet with people who can potentially change your life. That's being an entrepreneur, and it might not even feel like it at the moment. I think to my daughter, who when she was an undergrad befriended a prof who was an MD, and my daughter wasn't pre-med, but it was somebody who was really interesting to her, and it changed her life. She ended up working at the National Institutes of Health and then going to med school, and now she's a doctor, because all of this was because she allowed someone to mentor her, because she reached out and got to know someone. So when we do that kind of thing, we change lives. It could be our own life, it could be the life of somebody else. And that's being an entrepreneur, whether you think about it or not. You may not be creating a business, but you're creating your life. And it's so easy now to just only text and not even get together in the same room with people. I think taking the risk to put yourself out there, to say, hey, world, this is what I do. This is who I am. Personalizing oneself so that you stand out from the crowd because you're saying, this is my voice. It's what I do. It's what I'm about. What do you think? And maybe sometimes you get cold water thrown in your face. I guarantee it'll happen more than once, where the answers you get aren't the answers you'd hope for. But sometimes you'll meet people who will change your life. And that's actually as important as starting your 403B. Starting your 501c3, starting your nonprofit, starting your business, figuring out what you want to do, and then finding people that can help you realize that dream is what life is more like today. And fortunately, we have the tools to do that in a much easier way. We have access to people in ways that we didn't. Some kid from Afghanistan found me from 7,000 miles away to teach him some lessons, and then as it turned out, it changed his life. He took the risk, and it paid off. And so we all need to take those risks on a human level. That's entrepreneurship to me.
Wonderful. Well, you've given us some amazing advice today, and I really appreciate you joining us for this inaugural year.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be a part of it. It's going to be fascinating. I can't wait to see the videos and hear the playing.
So I'm excited to share the tapes with you. And one last thing to the camera here is that if you like the interview that you're seeing today, we ask that you would go to our Patreon channel. That's www.patreon.com/ictusmusic and support us. And you can learn more about us at ictusmusiccompetition.com or trumpetcompetition.com. Thank you.